I'm calling to order the Tuesday, February 3rd, 2015 meeting of the Township of South Orange Village Board of Adjustment. May we have a roll call?
That's Mr. Don.
Here.
Mr. Descala.
Here.
Mr. Reeves.
Here.
Mr. Semper.
Here.
And Mr. Breen.
Here.
Pursuant to Section 5, Chapter 231, PL 1975, this is to state for the record that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the public by posting and maintaining the annual notice of regular meetings on the bulletin board in Village Hall, by publishing the annual notice of regular meetings for the 2015 in the December 2014 edition of the South Orange Maplewood News Record, and by filing said notice in the office of the village clerk. Okay, so the first order of business this evening is the approval of minutes for our meetings on December 2nd and January 6th. So why don't we go to the December 2nd minutes that we received from Jetta. The track changes, it looks like I'm the only one that had anything to say in there. And the revision that I made was that we make it clear that it says, consistent with the board's request at the previous meeting, Singular proposed to move the antenna such that the antenna would no longer require additional height atop the building to properly receive signals. That was the whole gist of their coming back to us, and I inserted that in there. And other than that, I found that the minutes were accurate. Do we have other comments?
I read the minutes, and I have no problems with them at all.
May we have a motion?
I'll move that we accept the minutes as amended by Mr. Reeves.
Second? I'll second it.
Mr. Don.
Abstain.
Mr. Descala.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Semper.
Yes.
And Mr. Breen.
Abstain.
We move on to the January 6th minutes for 2015. And here, all I see is somebody ended the meeting at 8 p.m. from 9 p.m. to 8 p.m.
That was me.
You're a real stickler, aren't you, Bill? So,
I wouldn't think it took us 2 hours to do all that.
so
It wouldn't be a record by any means.
yeah, so I obviously didn't find anything. It was a very short, perfunctory meeting. With that, I think it's fine. Can we have a motion?
I move to accept it as amended.
I second.
And Mr. Don.
Yes.
Mr. Descala.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Semper.
Yes.
And Mr. Breen.
Yes.
Okay. So now we move on to the main business at hand, which is the application for completeness. And this is case 1017, St. Paul's Outreach at 315 Self Place. Applicant is seeking a D variance for rear and side yard setbacks. Okay, Ms. Birkenwald, would you like to come forward? And
You have
make
to
sure
you have to talk into the microphone.
you got to speak right into the microphone and move it if you
Why don't
need.
you take it out and just hold it.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing me at this relatively short period of time, and your plan to review this very quickly, and my client just appreciates it. He couldn't be here tonight. There was a death in his family.
So do you want you want us to go ahead and go over, I usually structure it based upon the planner's comments, and then we go line by line, or would you like to, do you have a preface of anything that you would like to say about this application?
No, this is an application by an auxiliary of the Roman Catholic Church. It's called St. Paul's Outreach. And the use is very similar to what previously was there. It was a house for the Salesians. And they basically had also a very similar use. There is a chapel on the addition of the building, above which are bedrooms, and then there's the main house, which is bedrooms, living room. We did not expect to draw architectural drawings because there's no construction proposed. It's just, the Salesian use are very similar. They have a different outreach cohort. They mainly, the St. Paul's outreach reaches out mainly to college students, whereas the Salesians reached out to the general public. But the use is very similar. It's part and parcel of a church use. They will not, by the way, be having public church services. It's a small chapel. I think that there are 24 seats, and any church use is really more private for those that they seek outreach to, not for just anyone in the neighborhood. So the only item on the plan is list that we would ask a waiver for would be 46, which is asking for architectural plans, which would be something of a financial burden. I thought we could supply the information with my client's testimony as to the layout and perhaps add something to engineering plans. But we were hoping we would not have to go to the expense of complete architectural plans since we're not doing any construction. The reason we didn't meet the conditions, by the way, is really 5 feet on each side of the existing building. And it's a very large lot, so the setbacks, because it's a large lot, are unusually large. So I think if you look at the survey, I don't want to argue the case, but the conditions that we don't meet are not really onerous conditions, or really, we're not really close to anybody's house. It's just that the setback requirements are fairly large. I think when the Salesians occupied this, they just were granted a use permit. Nobody ever noticed that the setbacks were 5 feet short.
I'm going to interrupt just for a second, let the record reflect that Mr. Parlapiano has arrived, and I assume you don't object, Ms. Birkenwald.
Oh, no.
He came in here just as you began speaking. Okay.
It's a cold night for driving.
Yeah, I was rather stuck.
Everybody
I
should drive
apologize.
carefully and a little slower.
Mr. Dwyer, is it appropriate at this juncture, given even what Ms. Birkenwald said, and my looking at this application, and one of the questions I had was, why are we even hearing this? Why do we even need this application if things have not changed from the previous use? Why are we hearing this? Is that something I should save? And alert Ms. Birkenwald and her applicant that this is something they need to explain to us, but we should just proceed through completeness and not get into that?
I think that decision was made by the zoning officer, that we need to have an application before the board. Unfortunately, he's not here this evening, so in his absence, I would suggest we allow her to go forward with
Okay.
completeness.
Okay, well, certainly we should go forward with the completeness, but that's something, Mr. Rinda said he was going to be late.
What he said to me, basically, the two side and rear yard setbacks are about 5 feet short on all three sides, on the rear and both sides. Partly that's because the lot is unusually large. And technically, we don't meet all the conditions for the conditional use as a religious institution because of the 5 feet deficit on both sides and the rear. So Mr. Renda felt this should be a board decision. The use is essentially really the same as the Salesians, other than the ages of the target group.
I'm going to go out on a limb and assume but I'll ask. Has this received a variance, this use?
No, the Salesians, I think, actually, they built the chapel, the large addition to the building, which is a chapel on the first floor and bedrooms on the second floor. And they got a building permit, but it was before Sal Renda was the zoning officer. And again, it was for 5 feet, so perhaps nobody ever picked up that they were slightly short on the conditions for the conditional use.
No, but I think your question is not the bulk variances, but the use variance. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
For the use, did you require a variance for the use? Did you get a variance, or did the
There
applicant?
was no variance when the Salesians, at least as far as my search has revealed, we haven't. I'll make another maybe Oprah request, but I was told that there was nothing in the file other than a building permit for the chapel.
Okay, so,
If,
go ahead.
if I may just maybe clarify a bit, and this is because it's a religious, use.
Yep.
It is considered a conditional use under the ordinance. As a result of the fact, whether it's a bulk variance per se, it is one of the conditions of that conditional use. And as a result, statutorily, there is a requirement that a, quote, use variance, but for conditions not met for a conditional use, a D variance is required, and conditional uses require site plan approval as well. So that's what triggers this, even though it may seem as though it's a bulk variance per se.
Yeah.
It is a condition of the conditional use.
Right. So the reason, that's kind of why I asked. If it had received a variance approval previously, then we wouldn't have anything to talk about, I wouldn't think.
Right, and that's my question. Mr. Renda just arrived. Welcome.
Sorry, I'm late.
And we just got into this question of, like, why are we even hearing this? You know, if this was approved beforehand, and we're learning that this didn't have a variance before. We want to hear from you of why we're seeing this now, because Ms. Birkenwell was saying the Salesians are very similar to the St. Paul's Outreach. So if it was going on before, now why are we hearing it now? What's happened?
We checked the records on the property files, and we looked back on all applications, and we never found any prior approvals for the use of the property for anything other than a residence. That's what it was granted. I believe in the 80s it was granted a tax exemption because it was owned by the Salesian Brothers, which is a religious organization, but there was never any site plan approvals or anything approving any use of the property. It's my understanding that it was just a home for the brothers, a place for them to live. And I think the application that's before you now is, in a sense, different than just a home for the members of the parish, because I believe they do plan on having gatherings and things like that. And speaking with Mr. Mokia, who's did I have his name right?
Yeah.
It's my understanding that they plan on having people living there, but also having people coming in and doing some programs and things like that. Since there was no prior approval, it was my opinion as the zoning officer that they would need at least a conditional use approval as a religious organization. But since the property as it's currently laid out and designed doesn't meet the conditions of a conditional use, then it then prompts the use variance application. And that's why I directed them to the zoning board.
So as a residence, it didn't require, it had separate setback requirements, some different setback requirements? Because if they received a building permit at the time, then I guess...
It wasn't a building permit. There was no applications. There were no I mean, they may have gotten building permits for any improvements that they did on the site. The only thing we found on record was a resolution by, I think, the Board of Trustees at that time, granting them the tax exemption. We found no applications, no prior board approvals or anything like that. And this is going back to the 80s. So, and obviously things have most likely changed, over the years since then. So I think the way to get this through would be for them to just come to the board and basically explain to the board what the proposed use of the property is. It is a religious organization. There are conditional uses, conditional use. It is a conditional use permitted in that zone, but as I said, it doesn't meet the requirements for the conditional use.
Sal, what if this were just a residence for brothers, for any order or whatever? It's just simply a residence. Would they have to, even if it's for
For you or me.
religious people, do you need a conditional use at that, variance at that point?
If they're only living there, then no, it would be just treated as a home. The tax exemption is a different issue, because it's owned by the church.
And
But
what if they're having private worship services of the people who live there?
if there's no outside parties coming to this, if there's no people who don't live there, coming to that, then I would, it's no different than, having, you doing something in your home,
Right.
with your family, or the residents in that home. It's when you start to bring in outside people, groups, things like that, then it becomes a place of worship, and, in my,
Right.
interpretation.
And that's my question on this. I'm assuming that since you've considered it a house of worship, that there are going to be people coming from outside to visit, at least with some regularity, but on the other hand, you're saying this isn't a church.
It's not going to hold public church services where anybody in the neighborhood could come in. They have a small chapel with 24 seats. The house has, I think, 10 bedrooms and 10 full bathrooms. So it's primarily residential, but they will have smaller gatherings. If they have a large gathering, it'll be at Seton Hall. But they're very integrated to Seton Hall. It's really an auxiliary of the Roman Catholic Church, but it's a separate nonprofit corporation. That's just the way these things are organized. And their use is not purely residential. They will have some students come, maybe share meals.
That's right. I
maybe
mean, when
have
you look at the
counseling.
I read the website for St. Paul Outreach, and you're right, I mean, it describes it as a place to bring the students together, to foster community, and it certainly sounds like it's going to be a community, a place that brings that community together on a regular basis.
Okay,
from-
so it falls off that fence between residence and house of worship, falls into the house of worship box, as it were.
Religious organization,
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Because outside parties are coming. Okay, all right, so that answers my question there. Now I understand that.
And we're down to completeness.
Well, I'm still actually, I'm still a little confused about the side and rear yard setbacks. And so this house has been in its current condition with the same distance from the side yard property line and the rear yard property line since the 80s. They don't have an approval for that, and now because of this use variance, we're going to consider granting a variance for those, even though it's not something that they're building. And so I'm wondering, is it, if it was just a house, would these same setbacks apply, or is it only
No.
because of the use that it applies?
It's because of the use.
Okay.
Yeah, the condition, if you look on the requirements for the conditional use, they basically double or triple the
Triple.
setbacks on the various boundaries if
Right.
it's a conditional use.
And there's also an
That's
issue-
what throws it into this.
There's also the issue regarding parking.
Yes.
And the
Right.
shape of the lot itself, causes a lot of the issues regarding the not meeting the conditions. It's basically, you can call it a flag lot, but it's really T-shaped. It's not,
Right.
Not exactly a flag lot, but, and because of that, and there's parking in the driveway that comes in, and there's parking basically in front of the house or the building, which is in violation of the
And that's an
conditions.
ongoing thing, right? This has been going on for a while?
Since the 80s.
Yeah, since the Salesian Brothers took it over, but again, we weren't able to find any prior approvals on how it became that, but we did find that the town did recognize that as a religious property owned by a religious organization, and that's why it was granted the tax exemption at the
I
time.
think one of the dimensions of the property is about 300 feet. It's a very unusually large property. And the condition, the setback, is 5 feet short out of 300.
Right. I saw
So
that.
I would imagine that back in the 80s, when they looked at it, they just didn't pick up that it didn't meet the conditions.
Well, it wasn't the use, so they were treating it like a residence, it sounds like.
That's my understanding, but, again, the rules back then may have been different, and there was never a certificate of pre-existing nonconformity issued on the property, so it wasn't able to, once it went vacant, and it's been basically empty for over a year now, I believe.
Well,
Just out of curiosity, did the applicant come to you? How did this come to your attention? The applicant came in to get a permit, or?
They basically came in, well, they contacted me first before they purchased the property, and I explained it to them at that point that it would have to go to the board. They would have to get variances because they don't meet the conditions, or at the very least, if they met the conditions, they'd have to go to the planning board because it is in my opinion, a different use than how it was used before. Now, I don't know the history behind the building and the chapel and all of the other things that have been added to the property over time. I don't know if, I didn't find anything on our records about prior approvals. I would assume they got building permits, but, at the time, it may have only been, well, we're just doing an addition, and they built the addition, and, and that's how it was done.
I guess the point is, that if they built the addition as a residence, they wouldn't need an approval.
Correct.
Right.
There's, here, I know we're also, this is taking us still afield from the completeness, but it's included in the packet. So I'm wondering what point it is in here. And either of you can opine on this, Ms. Birkenwalder or Mr. Rinda. There's a certificate of taxes paid for 2015. It says St. Paul's Outreach, taxes paid for the first quarter. So I'm wondering why they're paying taxes if in fact, it's as you said, it's a religious organization. And then secondly, there looks like an agreement that was between the town and the Salesian Society back in 2011 that they would agree to pay some amount of taxes. It seemed like there was some dispute between the town and the Salesian Brothers about whether they were tax exempt or not.
There was, the agreement I included is called a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. And the Salesians and my client have agreed to make a payment in lieu of taxes. And that's why I submitted the application with the taxes paid, because they do make some payment. It's not exactly a tax payment, it's in lieu
Right.
of taxes.
Right. Okay, so is this going to have any bearing on this application,
No, I believe the payment in lieu of taxes is basically a good faith effort on behalf of the Salesian Brothers. The 2015 taxes, however, it's my understanding, in talking with the tax assessor, that once the property, if it's tax exempt because of religious reasons, once the property isn't used for those over the course of a year, then it gets put back onto the tax rolls. And because they weren't able to get the application in before the board, before the beginning of the year, unfortunately, it needed to go back onto the tax rolls. So I believe it, depending on how the application goes, if it is approved and it's granted, then the tax exemption would take effect, I believe, beginning of 2016, I think is when it can then be taken back off the tax rolls. That's my understanding of it.
They have paid the payment in lieu of taxes January 30th, or at the end of January, they paid the payment that would be due February 1st. And that was accepted.
All right, we have any other questions before we march into completeness? Okay, so let's go ahead and get that started. I'm going to run down from Ms. Gruel's memorandum dated January 29, 2015, of the various items on the application, which are complete or not complete. And Ms. Gruel recommended that the application be deemed conditionally complete, subject to the applicant providing the remaining required materials at least 14 days prior to a scheduled public hearing. I actually had some questions about that. I'm not so sure that I'm at that point yet, so I wanted to run down some of these. All right, so, and stop me at any point if you have questions. The applicant, item number 10, has not provided letters signed by a responsible utility, but no construction is proposed, so Higher Gruel didn't have any objection. I don't have any objection. Do we have any objection? Okay, no. Not submitted Essex County Planning Board application, but it's not on a county road. Conceivably, approvals might be required if we do approve this, but they're not proposing any construction, so I don't even see that as being applicable. Okay. Yep. Item 12, Essex County Health Department application. Again, conceivably, there could be something there, but I don't see that happening either.
Well, the only thing about that is that I just heard that there's 10 bathrooms in this house. And not sure if anybody has approved that. And it would be nice to hear from somebody about whether or not it's been approved.
You need 10 bathrooms approved?
Well,
That's just a building.
10 bathrooms at one sewer connection is,
Well, that wouldn't be the health department anyway.
oh, it would be
No.
the utility company?
Well, the 10 bathrooms would have to get approval through the building department to install the bathrooms.
Okay.
And if the only utility issue that the town would be interested in would be the sewer line in the street,
Right.
which would have the capacity to handle, 10 bathrooms. That's not the problem. The only issue that the applicant may have is their sewer lateral, making sure that that's adequate in size. But that's really up to them. That's not,
Okay.
something that the town, if there's a problem, then it's going to back up into the house. It's not going to.
Right, so it made me think of the health department, right?
Obviously, they had to get building, plumbing inspections, for the installation of the bathrooms and utilities at some point in time.
Okay.
Okay.
So-
Just following up on, is there any issue with whether or not they should be required to have more than, I guess they have one EDU?
He's speaking to the
In terms of a sewer connection. I guess it's being treated as a single-family residence, but it really isn't.
I don't know how it was, when it was first done. I don't know what was proposed, but again, if there's, the sewer lateral itself is most likely either a 4 or 6 inch line that goes into the street. If they were to try to improve that or increase the size of that, then they would have to get a road opening permit. We would have to go to the utility authority, make sure that, they could handle additional capacity. They're not proposing any, addition, to the building. They're not increasing the number of bathrooms or anything like that, at least, not at this point. So if they were to do that, then it could conceivably increase the volume of flow in their lateral and ultimately into the main in the street. But right now there's no issues with the main in the street that I'm aware of. There hasn't been any problems. And if they wanted to increase capacity, now if this was a large scale development, it would be a different issue. If you were adding 200 units, then you take a look at and you do a study and you make sure that the sewer capacity is there, and that the joint meeting has the ability to take on the additional flow in the line. But that's not the case here. It's an existing, and I don't know how many people will be using the building at any given time, and the flow is basically a peak flow that you have to take a look at. If they're flushing all 10 toilets at the same time and running the sinks all at the same time, most likely it's still not going to be an issue.
Okay.
Move on? Okay. No application to the Hudson Essex Passaic Soil Conservation District. Again, they're not proposing any construction. If we require them to build a berm or something, I suppose, in the back, maybe they're going to be disturbing the soil, but there is none. planned.
Well,
Right.
at
No
this point,
construction.
correct. But
Everything has been there since the 80s.
the only thing I would say to that, and it probably won't meet the threshold, but depending on how the parking is evaluated and handled and configured and explained, because I have a lot of questions about the parking. So that would be soil disturbance, but I think you have to disturb more than 5,000 square feet before you have to go to that board, so, but that would be conditioned,
Right.
obviously.
Very
So-
later anyway.
Yeah. I'm happy to make that a
Yep.
condition. Okay. Not submitted any copies of DOT or DEP approvals. That's Department of Transportation and Environmental Protection. Okay. And what would that be for, Ms. Gruhl?
Not sure, but
It's on the
that's why
checklist.
normally Mr. Dwyer has as a condition under anything, the
Okay.
broad scope that any outside agency approval is a condition.
Okay, all right, that's normal then, that's what we, make that a condition of any approval, potentially. Okay, item number 15, now we're getting into things that I have some questions about, and I think you do too, Mr. Don. The applicant has not submitted a digital copy of the site plan, but this is the site plan that we have here, yes?
That's a hard copy, yeah, we haven't, and we haven't received no, we didn't.
They're supposed to send an electronic copy.
Okay. So do you have a digital copy, Ms. Birkenwald?
I don't, but I'll call the engineer. I would imagine that's not a difficult thing to have you.
Okay, so that hasn't been done. Okay. Let's move on to item 16. The applicant has submitted a site plan, but it does not include all required signature lines.
So that needs to be added.
Now, that would be if we approved, isn't that correct?
Well, you're supposed to
It should be
include
there
it.
It should be on the
anyways.
plan.
Right, so that should be added. Okay. The applicant has not submitted photographs of the property. Now, Ms. Gruhl didn't take exception to that, but I think I may take exception to that. This is, Ms. Birkenwald, this is a property that I didn't even know existed, and I live in Montrose. And I suspect other people on the board weren't aware that it existed. And you're proposing now a religious organization. It's not just a house. We've established that. And we can't even see it from the street.
We'll provide photographs.
So, I'd like to see that as a condition of completeness. I'm not willing to just say, oh, well, wait for it. This is, I think, would be essential to your application. I think it'd be very important to have copies of this.
We'll have the planner provide photographs. She was unavailable at the time I filed the application, but we will provide photographs.
The applicant has not submitted a traffic/parking impact assessment. Mr. Don, what are your concerns?
Well, I guess my concerns are, A, I would like to see clearly on a plan what exists, because the plan that we have, I assume that this is existing conditions, but there's also notes on it talking about pavement to be removed, so it's like everything is on one plan. I would like to see what exists and what is proposed, and some sort of clear explanation of how the parking is calculated, how it's provided, and is it legal the way it's provided, or is it just sort of what exists now? Because I guess there's 8 spaces on the site. I don't know if that's the right number, based on the number of bedrooms in the space, or the number of seats in this chapel, or the combination of the two. I don't know if it's how the calculation is done. Is it done based on the largest room?
The calculation was done based on the chapel, which has 24 seats, so it requires 8 parking spaces. Under Reese's, a house has a maximum requirement of 3 parking spaces, but there's an overlap between the use of the chapel and the residents of the house. Additional Seton Hall students that may come to the house will walk over. This is
Well, you're giving
a short
testimony
walk.
now.
Pardon?
You're giving testimony now, so
I'm just trying to explain it, but yes, I'll have people testify as to
Yeah, I'd
that.
like to see this as, again, there's this whole page here is essentially things that aren't complete. And I think in any religious organization, parking, it often comes down to, as you know, parking is a significant issue. And it may not be an issue in this case, but let's establish that at the completeness stage, rather than wait and then come back with something that itself may not be adequate. I want to know where the parking spaces are now, if they propose to change their size. And you did provide the information about the 8 for the 24 seats, and that does follow the town's requirements. But I think, what else do we need to know about the parking? You know, for example, how many people might show up on a given night if there's some sort of party or dinner? You know, are you going to put in extra parking spaces, or is it just 8? These, and
think-
when the hours that people will come and go?
I think when it comes to a parking and traffic study, that basically comes down to what the proposed uses of the property are going to be. And that's something that would be put into the study. If it's anticipated that there's going to be events and things like that, what part of the building is being used, how is it, how is that functioning, and how do you determine how many parking spaces are required? That's something for the applicant to put forward. Say, we plan on using the space for these types of events or uses.
like the Opus Dei house, which is on Montrose, I don't know how it's used, but I know a couple times a month there's 25 cars parked in front of the house. Now, they have an exceptionally long circular driveway, and even after that, there's spillover on the street. So I don't know if this use is having the same functions, but I'd like to know how it operates. Where are the people going to be parking?
We'll provide answers.
And, if it truly is going to be the limited amount that you're suggesting, we're not looking for left and right turns and delays and that, but, we have here nothing. We have nothing here. And there's somewhere mentioned in the application, it's contradictory. There's one sentence in here that you may not meet the parking ordinance requirements. It says that in the application, and then on the other part, it says, well, you do because you have the 8 spaces. So, by your own applications, there's a suggestion that you may not meet the requirement. So I want to see at least more explanation.
You want more detail on the spaces, I understand.
Okay, item 20, the applicant has not submitted an affirmative statement indicating how all conditional use standards are met. The applicant has indicated several conditions will not be met, but not a full statement of all applicable standards. I don't understand that, Ms. Gruhl, because they're saying that, their whole application is about rear and side setbacks.
And they may have it, and I'm sure the planner would testify, but to the extent that the conditions of the conditional use, there are a number of those, they just need to say affirmatively whether they've met it and how, and then move on to the next.
So the zoning table doesn't cut it?
Now, the zoning table, it's the conditional use standards under houses of worship.
So they need a supplement to the zoning table that also has the conditional uses, the standards are listed.
Okay. Got it. Ms. Birkenwald, are you clear on that?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that also gets back to a clear understanding of what the proposed uses of the property are.
That goes, yes, yes.
Item 25, the applicant has not submitted a plan that includes a lot and block number of the property within the title block.
So they just need to add that.
Okay, so that wouldn't, you don't think that's a reason to hold this up, that item in particular? Okay. I'm not going to object to it. Anybody have any concerns about that one? Okay. The applicant has not included the telephone number of the record owner of the property on the plans. I didn't even know that was required, but It's not on there. You know, that's a small thing, but it kind of, to me, signifies as part of the larger picture of, there's a bunch of things that need to be done for this application. That by itself is not a deal breaker.
It doesn't appear to be anywhere in the application either, so.
Yeah,
It'd be nice if it was somewhere.
It needs to be on there. We didn't know who the owner is and how you contact them.
If they're already redoing the site plan,
Mhm.
these are technical details that should be
Mhm.
included on the site plan, and that's already a need to redo those.
We'll
So,
provide Mr.
yeah.
Marsh's,
The applicant has not submitted information about historic districts. Okay, so it's in Montrose Park Historic Districts. And how should they, what do they need to do, you know, as far as identifying the district?
Well, the checklist requires the identification of any historic district if the site is in it. So it's just a question of stating on the site plan that it is within the historic district. And as a result of that, there may be some questions that come out of that, but it's fact-based.
Okay, so that needs to go on a revised site plan then, correct?
This is the building.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, item 35 is the applicant's not identified any critical environmental areas, but there's no new construction proposed. I don't have any objection to that. Okay, the applicant has not identified the location of existing trees. Again, there's no new construction proposed, so I think,
Only as any modifications to the parking area may be affected. So if in the development of the parking, trees are going to be removed, I'd like to know.
right. So if you're moving trees, Ms. Birkenwald, then, you know, we'd want to see that. Otherwise, the board doesn't have a problem with granting this waiver.
We'll avoid trying to move any trees. There shouldn't be any need for it.
The applicant has not submitted a landscaping plan. Again, no new construction is proposed. And again, to the extent you're moving anything around, parking or otherwise, then a landscaping plan would be in order.
Well, one thing I would say, on the plan that they've submitted, on the north side, northeast side of the property, there's a note that says remove pavement back to setback line. So you're going to end up with 7 feet of potential pavement all along the northeast property line. So I'd like to know what's going to end up happening in that if paving's being removed. It's not just going to be dirt.
Yeah, and actually, you know, that actually does bear upon, you know, it is a variance for setbacks on the, even though it's, you know, relatively wide side yard setbacks, there should be some statement of what the landscaping that's proposed will be there, because that is often a mitigating factor in the board granting these sorts of variances, if the landscaping that serves as a buffer is adequate. Okay? Okay, the applicant has not provided a developer's agreement with the village that addresses affordable housing, but again, no new construction is proposed, so I don't have any problem with granting that waiver. Anybody else? Okay. Number 41,
It's the same, we've already dealt with the
the signature blocks need to be in there for the chair, the secretary, and the engineer. The applicant has, this is 42, has not submitted confirmation that all federal, state, county, and local permits have been obtained.
This is one of our,
We often let
Put that
that
in,
go
yeah.
as a condition of approval, and I have no problem with that.
Yep.
Okay. The applicant has not submitted information regarding utility systems, but again, no new construction is proposed. We discussed the issue of the tin toilets. I don't object to granting this waiver. Any problems with that?
no.
Okay. The applicant has identified the location of the existing structures within 200 feet of the property, but not their use.
Well, they haven't really identified the structures within 200 feet. They've identified the properties, but it only shows the pieces of the garages that abut to the property line.
The planner will provide this, we'll have it before the
Well,
next
is this
meeting.
usually presented on the site plan? Does it, how would they normally do it? Would it be oral testimony?
No. It's a checklist item. It's whether the board feels that that's something that they want, but it is a checklist item.
Okay. It's in there. I know Self Place, I know where that is. It's in a residential area, but do we want to grant this waiver or not? Do we want to know the fact that it is all residences there?
Yeah, I mean, we know it's residences. I want to know, I would like to see where they are relative to particularly the parking that's being proposed.
Okay, so that needs to be done also. Item 46, the applicant has not submitted architectural plans and elevations.
I would like to see plans. They don't have to be, drawn by a licensed architect, but someone should be able to take your site plan and measure the rooms and give us some rudimentary plans. I'd like to see them. I don't need to see elevations, you can give us photographs, but I'd like to see plans.
You mean floor plans?
Yeah,
Yeah, I would too. Basic.
yeah.
All right, so floor plans could be provided, and you're not requiring a licensed architect to draw
Yeah,
them,
that's
but
fine.
somebody who could draw out.
They'll
But
need
you
to
wanna see
label
the
the
Not with a
uses.
crayon.
They'll need to label the uses of the rooms that are drawn, so not just walls, and
Okay.
dimensions. You want to show the uses as well.
Yeah, and we're saying it doesn't need to be by an architect. On the other hand, if you get an architect, you know it's going to be done correctly.
Right.
So you're taking your chances with the non-architect, but.
But their engineer should be able to do it.
Yeah. But again,
Well,
and
if
this
you-
is part of, it's asking to be partly a house of worship, and this would actually, this could actually serve your application well.
But no elevations, just photos.
I think you do want the plans to be prepared by a professional, and most likely an architect is the professional that, would do this. I mean, the checklist item is for architectural plans.
Do we
So,
want to make it an architect? Say it should be architectural plans?
If the board requires it.
Let's do it, let's make it.
Or an engineer.
It-
you
it
know,
is a
I mean,
significant
a professional,
expense.
not somebody just sitting down and
Does the
doing it.
engineer do these?
He could do the
well, whether you're having an
as-built.
engineer do it or an architect do it, I mean, it's still gonna,
Yeah.
there's still gonna be a cost involved, but I mean,
Right, but is an
typically would.
engineer acceptable from a zoning officer?
Well,
Would you-
Typically, an architect would be doing.
Let's make it architectural. It says architectural, have an architect do it.
But just the plans, not
Yes.
elevations.
I
Just
don't
floor
think-
plans.
Floor plans.
Yes.
They're going to take pictures, they're going to provide pictures anyways.
We don't need the elevations if they
Right.
provide pictures.
And on the floor plans indicate what the uses are for each of the
Right.
rooms that
Yes,
are identified
right.
in the building.
So the use of each room in the residence/chapel. Can I move on?
Yes.
Item 47, the applicant has not submitted a statement addressing the storage and disposal of solid waste from the property. Well, again, since there will be some people coming from outside, is a dumpster going to be there? We need to know this and where you intend to locate it.
It should either be identified on the site plan if there's a separate dumpster enclosure or something like that, or on the architectural plan if there's a location in the building itself where they're going to, store that material, then it should go on that plan.
Do you have questions about that, Ms. Birkenwald?
No, I
Okay.
understand.
Item 55, the applicant has not provided information on the site plan indicating the location of lights. Oh, has not information.
Submitted.
Applicant has not information on the site plan indicating the location of lights, but has not submitted a light. There's something wrong here.
Yes, there's a typo, obviously.
It's like Steve Martin when he says some people have a way with English language and others not have way.
Not have a way. So there's
There's some lights indicated, but.
there are some lights that are on the plans,
So that the
but
word not
they don't
visible.
necessarily, they don't have the level of detail.
I think it would
that-
be good to have a lighting plan, because again, if there's floodlights shining into the neighbor's backyard, now's the time to get rid of them.
Just say
And-
decidedly residential area.
Yes,
Right.
and I have personal experience
Yeah.
with this, so it's no joke.
Yeah.
So we need a lighting plan. The applicant has not submitted a signage plan, but no new construction is proposed at this time, and you're not proposing a sign,
No.
like at the driveway out front or anything like that?
As of now, no, and if they do have a sign, they would put a sign that has to conform to code. They would come in and have a sign application and be limited to the neighborhood zone.
I would recommend that if they are proposing a sign, that they put it into the
It would be
application
nice.
now.
People don't always
Well,
know.
mainly because of the shape of the lot. I believe there's already an existing sign.
Is there?
I believe so.
There's a sign here.
For the Salesian Brothers.
It's not too hard, because there's
property.
many more.
Again, I don't know how that was approved, but if they are proposing any kind of a sign, they should put it before the board, even if it does meet the zoning requirements. It's a good idea to have it in the application at this time.
Okay, that's a good suggestion, thank you. Okay, so that runs down the items. Are there any other items that the board has that aren't technically required, but that we would suggest that the applicant bring? We already talked about the photos.
Well, if they're going to resubmit for complete list, we should get the photos too.
Yes.
So we've covered floor plans, photos, properties within 200 feet, the building locations and their uses. We talked about a program of use and hours. Did we talk about that at all?
We didn't talk about that at
Well, that's
all.
not a checklist item.
That's not a checklist item. That would be,
Right, but you were saying whether it's required or not, things that we might want them to bring.
right. Go ahead to Ms. Birkenwald. What would we be looking for? It's not part of completeness, but what
Right.
we would be looking for.
Typically, when we talk about a use variance, especially a use where people congregate or religious uses, or, same with, nursery schools and stuff like that, we look for some kind of a schedule of events and uses on weekdays and weeknights or weekends, and when people arrive and depart, and, how the programming for the use might go. So some kind of a sketch of the programming in a schedule form.
Just remember, it's not a use variance. It's a conditional use. The use is not a variance.
Okay.
No, because you just said
I
use
did,
variance.
yeah,
okay.
typically with a use variance, right?
Well, essentially, since they don't meet the conditions, though, it is, in a sense, it's a D variance.
Conditions
And it's
we
related to
So-
the use.
are 5 feet on each side.
Yeah.
Well,
On each lot.
But in addition,
Maybe parking, maybe not.
right,
I think it goes to the conditions that aren't met and the impact of those conditions that aren't met on the adjacent property, and that's how the connection is. So in other words, if there's going to be parking in certain areas and that may impact the adjacent properties, then that's the concern. And that goes to the conditions that are not met, the conditional use standards. So, and
how
that's
well,
something,
How well the site can accommodate the use, even though the conditional use standards are not met. That's
correct,
That's the Coventry case. That's this.
right. So the idea that, as we stated in our memo at the end, an assessment of the existing parking and the anticipated demand for parking with the proposed new use of the building.
Right.
And that goes
That
to
request would certainly go to that.
programs and everything else.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So,
If we do provide floor plans, do you want the testimony of an architect too, since there's no construction? I was going to bring an engineer and planner and my client.
why don't you ask the question again? I'm getting the strobe light. You want to know if we actually want the testimony of an architect.
Yeah, since there's no proposed construction, I understand you don't care for elevations if we provide photographs showing it, but you do want floor plans, which may require an architect to draw. So do you think you'll want to hear the testimony of an architect? Again, we're not proposing any changes.
We are going to have plans signed by an architect. I personally don't, I mean, Bill, I'll leave that, I'll defer to your judgment on whether or not we want to hear from an architect.
I don't see the need for the architect to be here as long as they're signed, and we can question someone about the use of those spaces, and they can answer
Yes.
those questions, then I'm going to
My
be fine.
client will be familiar with that.
The only question that I see is accessibility. I don't know if the building as it's currently designed allows for accessibility, ADA standards. That's
Does it
something.
have to?
Is that a zoning issue?
Well, no, I don't know that, if it is or it isn't, but if it does have to meet accessibility, there may be some improvement that may need to be done, whether it's a ramp or something like that. And also, as far as the parking requirement goes, I believe at least one of those 8 spaces is going to have to be.
Would that be triggered without any changes, though?
It is basically a change, though. It's no longer just a residence, as it was before. I mean,
The site plan
uses.
The
does address a
Salesians did
handicap
have,
space
Right,
and and a vaguely noted ramp, so,
but,
but we don't know if that's a complying ramp
yeah.
and a complying handicap space.
And
so.
if that ramp is, how is that ramp
Right.
being done?
So as a house of worship, which would be a conditional use that wasn't before, it would have to be handicap accessible?
That's a code issue. I believe it does. I don't know for sure. I mean, that's something that they can look into. If they don't have to provide, handicap accessibility, then, they just provide the testimony that it's not required. I would think, though, that it's something that they would probably want to consider, though, being able to provide handicap accessibility if they're bringing, people in,
Is it something that we have to address?
Only as it may impact the site plan.
Right.
If it may result in some construction. I mean,
Or-
we could
or a
approve
floor
it,
plan
and then
or-
they could go to the building, they could file for a CO, and somebody says, hey, you've got to make this accessible, and then they'll be back to us for some,
It's
For
just
a
something
ramp.
that I think they should just look into. If-
We
if-
should
if,
look into
you
it
know,
to
if
nail it
it's something that they
down.
have to
What's
do,
the
then
issue?
the use of the Salesians was not just residential. They had programs there and a chapel.
we're not
They built
saying
it.
that it does, we're just saying that it would be good to do your homework now to determine
Mm-hmm.
whether there's anything that triggers accessibility requirements, and if they are, do you meet them?
Mm-hmm.
Because your ramp may be sloped at a 45-degree angle, so.
Ms. Birkenwald, do you have other questions?
No, I'll try to get this in time so we can go to the next month.
Well,
but
you know,
obviously there's
in your
a lot.
defense, you tried to get this thing done quickly, and you got it in quickly, but you can see there's still a number of things that need to be nailed down. In my opinion, given all the things that need to be done, I'm not in favor of deeming it complete here, just because there's so much stuff that we need to see from. Now, other people may object, and I know we've, in the past, certain items can be conditions of approval, or they didn't really matter. This, to my mind, sort of tips the other side, where there's just so much stuff that's essential to this application that is to be provided at completeness. It isn't here, and so to say it's conditionally complete is just defeat the whole purpose of a completeness hearing, because it's not even close to complete. I don't know if that's persuasive to the rest of the board or not. I'd have you come back, get this stuff that we asked for. When it's there, then we say, great, it's now complete. I don't want to trust that in 14 days before the application, it will all be in there, because I know how things can go
Well,
bad.
it's not a matter of trust, right? I mean, if we said the hearing, it's conditionally complete, assuming we get this following material 14 days before. If we don't, then it's not going to be heard, right? So I certainly wouldn't want to hear the application if we didn't have the material that we spoke about tonight within 14 days, so we had time to consider it, because it's not insignificant material, right? So I don't want to be getting it the night of the hearing and have to look at it while we're sitting here. But if the material comes in 14 days ahead, I'd be comfortable hearing it then, right? But I think you've got a tall order to get that done within 14 days, but
What I have to do really is, in order to have my notices in time, I have to send out notices about 20 days ahead of time instead of, 14 days ahead. So perhaps if then we're not complete, well.
Well, essentially, you have
we'll
2
ask you to
weeks.
carry it.
Right,
Yeah.
that's-
So I think you're pressing it.
I don't see this being done in 2 weeks.
Right.
Again,
But that's, I guess my point would be, that's the applicant's question,
Right.
right? So if they could get us all the material and get notices out, but we have all our material 2 weeks before, I would be comfortable hearing this next month, right? But that feels to me like quite a stretch, but that's not, if you can do it, I'd be comfortable hearing the case.
Okay, we will try.
well, does I disagree. I think it makes a mockery of completeness hearing.
Well,
There's
there
too
is
much
that.
here.
There is that.
There's too much here that isn't done. There's too much uncertainty. I don't want to say, oh, conditionally complete, oh, they're missing a few things, and we get in debate about missing a few things. There's just too much that needs to be done.
Well, to me, to me,
Sometimes what these
the
things
board could-
become is like, an applicant might start using a completeness hearing to determine what do we really want in an application versus what we say we want in our documentation.
Well, I think in this case, what we've asked for is what we asked for on the checklist, effectively, the material items from the checklist. We haven't
For the most
added
part.
anything, we haven't
Well-
made any big exceptions, right? I think the stuff that you could guess would matter to us in hearing
Things
was
that
on the
should have been-
checklist, and we said, yeah, we meant it.
So are things that
but this is
arguably
a-
should have been here in the
But
first
this
place.
is a completeness hearing, and I think that we want it to be complete. So now we're gonna say, okay, well, let's be incomplete, and in the final hearing, let's get everything.
Well, let me.
Why have this then?
Let me give a different point of view. The reason for this hearing is to make sure that when we get to the hearing where we hear the case, we have the material we believe we need to decide the case, right? That there's not gaps in the documentation when we get to the hearing, and that we've had enough time before the hearing to look at that material. That's the reason for this hearing. If we've achieved that, so if we've given the applicant feedback on exactly what we need and the time frame when we need it, and if they can provide that, so we go into our hearing with material in our hands 14 days before that meets our requirements, then I think this hearing has served its purpose.
I mean, the alternative is to do another completeness hearing?
Well, if the calendar's not busy, at times the board has, on the same night, deemed complete and gone ahead.
But that means they have to make their notice,
They would have to notice,
which means they'd have to make their notice next week.
well, 10 days in advance.
I'd be fine with that, and I think that, again, that just puts the onus on the applicant. It's a very tight time frame. You may not be able to pull it off, but if you can, I'd be perfectly comfortable with that.
I could probably, the revisions to the site plan are small items that I think could be done relatively quickly. The one thing that might take a little time and great expense is full architectural plans. But
They're not
just,
full.
room sketches
I think
might
what,
not
I think
take
what the
that
board's
long.
saying, Elaine, is, look, there are items they need to deem this complete. It's possible you could be deemed complete if you get the items to them 14 days in advance at the next hearing date, and if the board's not busy, they might go forward.
So I'll notice, and
then-
if for some reason the board doesn't want to hear it, we'll,
I guess my concern
Carry
is,
it.
yeah, they get some of the stuff in, and, at 14 days, and then we're at the actual hearing, where people are there to hear the actual application, and some of the stuff is in, and some of it's not, and,
Rusty, I would be happy to say that if some of the stuff is in and some is not, we don't hear the case. right?
Well,
That's,
except we've already deemed it complete. And so maybe if
no, we
don't-
haven't deemed it
No,
complete.
we've
We've
deemed
deemed
it
it complete
conditionally.
with
Conditions,
conditions.
but
If the
they could-
conditions aren't met, then we wouldn't hear the case.
Right.
And
so it's-
then we've come here and townspeople will be here. Wasted time, wasted, occupied
the document.
an auditorium. Yeah, I mean, we've done this before, Mike, we have. It's just in this particular case, and I know I've also experienced how things get thrown at the last minute, and we sometimes go, okay, we'll take it. And we could do that again, too. I think, look, you can do either way. It's not the earth is not going to shatter whether you do one or the other. Why don't you make a motion that you accept it, conditionally complete if everything's in it 14 days and let the board vote on it?
I'll make a motion that we deem this application conditionally complete, subject to the conditions that we've discussed, and I don't have them all written down, so I can't read them through, and that if that documentation is not provided within 14 days before the hearing, then we would not hear the application at the next meeting.
Do we have a second? Okay, so we don't have a second. So that motion fails. So may we have another motion? I guess the motion needs to be that it's not complete. Is that correct?
Correct.
Anybody to make the opposing motion?
I move that the application be deemed not complete, and that we get the items that we've discussed submitted, and then we have another completeness review before we hear this case.
Well, okay, before this motion is completed, because you can discuss between the primary motion and the second, I think. Can't you? I mean, in any case, if we deem it incomplete, can we simply at the hearing itself determine whether it's complete or not? And just do it that way? So they still can get it to us 14 days in advance, and we won't be held to any, statement of completeness prior.
I'm not smart enough to understand what you just
Those are
said.
Well, in other words, we could say it's incomplete at the hearing and not hear it. And in the way that we're going now, if they could submit something that's not to our liking, and we'd kind of be fixed hearing it.
No, that's what we don't want to have happen, is we set up an actual hearing date where we have townspeople here, and we say, oh, it's not complete, everybody go home. That's part of why we have a completeness hearing.
Yeah, if it's the only thing on the docket, I guess.
Yeah.
If the board wants to consider it conditionally complete, and obviously we'll try to get everything in on time. and
Mr.
if-
Parlapiano made a motion, nobody seconded it, and so nobody seconded it, so we now have another motion on the table. Do we have a second? We've got to decide. We can't sit in the middle. I can live with either. Do we have anybody else second it?
Second.
We have a second. Let's take a vote.
Mr. Don,
Yes.
Mr. DeScalo,
Yes.
Mr. Parlapiano,
No?
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Semper,
Yes.
and Mr. Breen.
Yes.
Okay, so the application's incomplete. I think we've given you some good instruction about what we need, and that we would return for a completeness hearing at the next scheduled meeting.
Which is March 3rd.
Thursday?
Yeah, because
March
February
3rd.
has 28 days.
Right. March 3rd.
So
at
you're
7 o'clock.
saying that March 3rd, there's not going to be, even if we get everything in, it's just a completeness
No, it's
hearing?
just a completeness
So I
hearing.
should not notice from
No,
March
don't
3rd?
notice.
So-
Okay. All right. If we're through with that, I wanted to just mention briefly the two items. We're still looking for 2 members to join the board.
Have there been any applicants?
No, there have been not as far as I'm aware of.
Okay.
And I've been in touch with the Board of Board of Trustees. They've told me they know of nobody yet. This is our, again, we're appealing to the townspeople. If somebody's interested in doing what I think is very interesting and important work in the town, we'd like to have an applicant. Mr. Dwyer, you're going to look up the question of whether a town employee can serve on the board. Okay?
I will, yes,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, so that's one item. The other item is, I've held off to today on the annual letter to the Board of Trustees, just because, one last chance, I emailed it to you. I didn't receive much in the way of response, but is there anything anybody else has to say about the letter?
I read it, Mr. Chairman. I thought it was pretty accurate and complete.
Okay, so then I'm going to go ahead and submit it this evening.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other items? Okay, so we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Anything that,
You're right.
No, it was just.